I'm Vivienne, and my husband drained our entire savings account, $30,000, just to impress his mother with a family vacation I wasn't even consulted on. But that wasn't the worst part. For years, I built a business from scratch while being belittled, ignored, and used as a silent trophy. I thought love meant patience, but was I just the convenient fallback while they smiled to my face? It was just another ordinary morning, yet the atmosphere in our house felt thick, suffocating. I could feel the weight of last week's unresolved argument hanging between Dorian and me. His refusal to discuss our finances had left me with a sense of unease that had only grown with each passing day. He was always evasive when it came to money. Money that I worked hard for. Money that I earned through countless hours of effort in my business. Yet, it always felt like he didn't appreciate the sacrifices I made. I stood by the kitchen counter, pouring myself a cup of coffee, my thoughts drifting. He had been distant lately, retreating into his own world. The tension in the air was palpable, but I tried to keep my emotions in check. The clinking sound of the coffee cup against the countertop felt louder than usual, each sound echoing in the silence. I glanced at the clock, noting that Dorian hadn't come downstairs yet. I took a deep breath, feeling a nagging frustration twist inside me. I was tired of being the one to always make things work, tired of being the one to keep the family afloat. Dorian's family had always belittled me, despite my success. It was as if my hard work was never enough, as if I was always expected to prove myself. I could feel the walls of our home closing in, and I wondered just how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was an alert from the bank. I unlocked the phone and blinked at the notification. A large withdrawal of $30,000 had been made from our joint account. My heart sank as the number on the screen seemed to swim before my eyes. Dorian had taken that much money without telling me. For a vacation, without consulting me. My hands shook as I held the phone, processing what I had just seen. Anger bubbled up inside me. How could he do this? How could he make such a decision without even speaking to me first? This was our money, our savings, and he just drained it without a word. I stormed upstairs, my footsteps heavy as they echoed through the house. I didn't even knock on the door. I pushed it open, finding Dorian sitting on the edge of the bed, lazily scrolling through his phone. His eyes flicked up at me, and I didn't give him a chance to speak. "Why did you take $30,000 from our account?" I demanded, my voice sharp, a knife edge to my words. He looked at me, his face momentarily blank, as if the question hadn't registered. Then, a defensive smile crept onto his face. "It's for the vacation, Vivienne," he said, his tone nonchalant. "I thought you'd be fine with it. It's for the family." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I was supposed to be fine with it? I had no say in the matter? "You thought I'd be fine with it?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You didn't even talk to me about it, Dorian. You just took the money, our money, without even asking me." Dorian's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it, as if the weight of his actions had only just begun to sink in. "It's not a big deal, Vivienne. It's just for a vacation." "A vacation?" My voice trembled with frustration. "You've spent the last few months belittling my career, making me feel like I'm not enough. And now you're taking our money for a trip, without even telling me, without even asking me if I'm okay with it?" I could see the guilt flicker in his eyes, but it was fleeting. Dorian was a master at avoiding confrontation, always deflecting, always playing the victim. But this time, there was no getting out of it. I was done pretending everything was fine. He stood up, running a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "Vivienne, I didn't mean for it to be like this. I just thought—" "Stop!" I cut him off. "You never think, Dorian. You never think about me. You just do what you want and expect me to follow along. Well, I'm done with that." There it was, the breaking point. His actions had finally pushed me to a place where I couldn't pretend anymore. I felt the weight of everything, years of sacrifices, of constantly trying to prove myself, of working myself to the bone while he lived in his privilege, enjoying the fruits of my labor. And now this. His eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected: fear. "Vivienne, don't what, Dorian?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous. "Don't stand up for myself. Don't demand respect, because that's exactly what you've been asking me to do my whole life with you." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Dorian opened his mouth, but no words came out. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, but he was at a loss for once. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving him in the room. The rest of the evening was a blur. I didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to hear his excuses. I needed space. I needed clarity. So I spent the rest of the night alone, my mind racing. The betrayal cut deep, and though I wanted to scream, I knew that would only make it worse. Instead, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. 16 years ago, I was a different person. A girl who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Back then, it had all been worth it. But now I was starting to wonder whether it had been worth the sacrifices I had made. It was in the silence of that evening that the decision started to form in my mind. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't. This was a line that had been crossed, and I wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't going to sit back and let him manipulate me anymore. I would take control of my life, my business, my finances. I would no longer let Dorian or anyone else dictate my worth. I stood by the window staring out at the morning sky. The air was crisp, the sun bright, but my thoughts were clouded with anger and determination. This was it, the turning point. The morning felt heavier than usual, weighed down by an unsettling mix of unease and frustration. I moved through the house mechanically, trying to avoid looking directly at Dorian. He was already gone, off to work, leaving me to deal with the lingering tension from last night. Our conversation about the bank withdrawal had barely been resolved, and the unresolved anger simmered in the back of my mind. But today, there was another issue looming, one that had always been a part of my life, but seemed to have gotten worse in recent months. My mother-in-law, Celeste. I hadn't wanted to face her today, but I knew it was inevitable. Celeste had always undermined my career, making it clear that she didn't respect what I did. "It's just a job," she had said more than once. I tried to shake the words out of my head, but they lingered like a foul taste. I wasn't just anything. I had built my business from the ground up, and yet, to her, my success was somehow less valid because I wasn't following the path she expected me to take. I sat down at the breakfast table, already dreading the conversation. My stomach was in knots. The scent of coffee filled the air, but it couldn't mask the discomfort hanging in the room. Dorian had barely spoken to me this morning. He seemed to avoid eye contact, almost as if he was silently choosing sides. That familiar weight settled in my chest, the feeling that I was on my own, even in my own home. And then, as if on cue, Celeste appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, dear," she said sweetly, though there was an edge to her voice. "I hope you're not still upset about the vacation. It's just something for the family." I forced a smile, trying to maintain composure. "I'm fine," I said, though I felt far from it. She took a seat, the air around her thick with judgment. "I just don't understand why you don't spend more time with your family. You've built this business, but where's the balance, Vivienne?" Celeste's tone wasn't one of concern, but of thinly veiled criticism. "It's like you're always working, too busy to even take a proper vacation." Her words stung, and I could feel the blood rushing to my face. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how hard I had worked, how many nights I'd spent alone, building something that was mine. But I held back, biting my lip, trying to keep it together for the sake of my own dignity. "You know," Celeste continued, looking me over with a scrutinizing eye, "it's not healthy to get so absorbed in something like that. Why don't you let someone else handle the business for a change? Maybe you should hire me to help manage it for you. I've had plenty of experience after all." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that felt like a challenge. I froze, my heart pounding. Hire her? The woman who had belittled everything I had ever done? The woman who had never once respected the years I had spent building my company from nothing? I felt my hands clench into fists under the table, but I couldn't let her see how furious I was. "Thanks, but I think I've got it under control," I managed to say through gritted teeth. The words came out colder than I intended, but I couldn't stop them. Celeste's smile faltered, but she didn't back down. "Well, if you change your mind, I'm here. I could handle things much more efficiently than you anyway." Her voice dripped with condescension, but I held my ground, trying not to let her words shake me. But as I sat there, my anger simmering beneath the surface, I realized something important. This wasn't just about her controlling my career. This was about her trying to control my life. It wasn't just a business deal to her. It was a way to remind me that I wasn't enough on my own. It was an attack on my independence, on the very essence of who I had become. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. Later that evening, Dorian and I sat down to dinner, and the tension was thick. Celeste was there too, of course. Her presence felt like a shadow looming over me. I could barely focus on the food in front of me. "Vivienne," Celeste began, her tone sugary sweet. "I hope you're not still offended about the vacation. It's just a family thing. I thought it was about time we all took a break." I could feel my patience fraying. She was doing it again, sneaking in her criticisms, testing my limits. Dorian remained silent as always, a passive observer in his own home. His inability to defend me had always been one of my greatest frustrations. "I think we've discussed it enough," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. It's hard to keep pretending that everything is fine, Celeste." She raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by my sudden boldness. "Pretending? I'm just trying to help you, dear." "I don't need your help," I replied, my tone sharp. "I've got my own ways of handling things." The words hung in the air, charged with an unspoken challenge. Celeste didn't say anything more, but I could see the flicker of resentment in her eyes. She had expected me to back down, to play the role of the submissive wife, but I wasn't that person anymore. As the evening wore on, I felt the weight of my decision to stand up for myself settle in. It wasn't easy, but I had to do it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Celeste. This was about me. It was about finding my voice, about reclaiming control over my life, my business, and my marriage. But the road ahead was not going to be easy. I had made a decision, but I knew the consequences would be steep. I would have to push back, not just against Celeste, but against Dorian too. I wasn't sure how this battle would end, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the silent wife. The house was eerily quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself pacing, unable to sit still. The tension between Dorian and me hung in the air like a heavy cloud. I hadn't seen him since the day of the withdrawal, and I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. He had taken something from me, something more valuable than money, and I wasn't sure if we could recover from it. I had thought long and hard about Dorian's actions. At first, I had tried to justify them. Perhaps it was just a lapse in judgment, maybe a mistake. But now, the realization was growing clearer. He had been blind to everything. The consequences of his choices, our savings gone, the betrayal of my trust, his disregard for me and my career, were all becoming undeniable. I felt the anger inside me burning, but there was also something else. It was the realization that Dorian had never truly seen me, not for who I was or what I had worked so hard to build. I walked through the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. I couldn't understand how he could be so disconnected. Was he so consumed by his family's influence that he had lost sight of what mattered? Did he even care? In that moment, I knew something had to give. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I was sure of one thing. The truth would come to light. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of the front door opening. Dorian had arrived home. I could feel my pulse quicken, my body tensing. He was here. It was time for him to face what he had done. I didn't wait for him to find me. I walked directly into the living room where he stood, his face a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. For a moment, we just stood there, each of us waiting for the other to break the silence. "I know," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've messed up." I stared at him, trying to read his face, trying to find something, anything, that would make sense of his actions. But there was nothing. He stood there, fidgeting with his hands, clearly uncomfortable. His gaze avoided mine, and that alone was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "You think?" I replied, my voice tight with frustration. "You drained our savings without even consulting me, and now you're standing here trying to tell me you know?" Dorian's eyes flickered toward me, his guilt now plainly visible. "Vivienne, I wasn't thinking clearly," he said, his voice breaking. I was so focused on trying to make my family happy, on trying to fix things, I didn't realize what I was doing to us." I felt a cold wave wash over me as his words sank in. My husband, the man I had once loved, had been so lost in his own world that he hadn't even considered the consequences of his actions. He hadn't thought about how his decisions would affect me, our future, or our relationship. It was as if I didn't exist in his reality, at least not in the way I needed to. "You didn't realize?" I repeated, my voice shaking now. "Dorian, this isn't just about money. This is about trust. This is about respect. I don't know who you've become, but this isn't who I married." Dorian's face crumpled, his eyes filled with a deep, raw regret. "I'm sorry, Vivienne. I messed up. I've been so caught up in my own issues. I couldn't see how much I was hurting you, how much I was hurting us." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to believe him, to forgive him, but another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, felt something inside me hardening. Words were no longer enough. "Dorian, I need more than this," I said, my voice steady now, though it felt like my heart was breaking. "I need to know you're willing to fight for us. I need to know you're willing to do what it takes to make this right." For the first time in a long time, Dorian met my gaze. He took a step toward me, reaching for my hand. I pulled away instinctively, unsure if I could ever trust him again. He faltered, but then his voice grew firmer. "I'll do whatever it takes, Vivienne, please. I want to make this right." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, but the question was whether that would be enough. Was it enough for him to change, for him to truly see me and respect me? Or was this just another moment in a long line of empty promises? Before I could answer, the sound of my phone buzzing interrupted us. I glanced down, seeing that it was a notification from the journalist I had been working with for the Forbes article. My heart dropped. Celeste had sent a message to the journalist, trying to steer the article in a direction that suited her. The message was a direct attempt to control the narrative of my life. Her interference was no longer just a matter of family dynamics. It was a direct attack on my career, on my autonomy. I felt the anger building again, but this time, it wasn't just about Dorian. This was about everything. My marriage, my business, my life. I had been silenced for far too long, and it was time to fight back. "I've had enough," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "This isn't just about you, Dorian. This is about me, my career, and my future. And if you can't see that, then we've got a bigger problem than I thought." Dorian's face paled, but before he could respond, I turned and walked away. I needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. But one thing was clear. The battle for control, for respect, had only just begun. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the office as I stood in front of the full-length mirror, trying to calm my nerves. Today wasn't just another day. This was my moment. The Forbes interview. My career, my future. Everything hinged on the success of this interview. I had prepared for weeks, meticulously crafting my words, positioning myself as the woman who had fought her way to the top, despite the odds stacked against her. But standing there, I couldn't shake the weight of everything else. Dorian's failure to see me, my family's judgment, Celeste's interference, it all gnawed at me. Would my achievements be recognized for what they were, or would my mother-in-law's shadow hang over them, distorting the truth of who I was? As I paced the room, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen, and my stomach sank. It was a message from Celeste. "Make sure you change the narrative. You're a supportive wife, not just a businesswoman. Focus on that." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She couldn't let me have this moment, could she? My whole life, I had been fighting to build my own identity, something separate from the roles others had assigned to me. But it seemed like Celeste couldn't let that happen. She wanted to dictate the story, to rewrite who I was in the eyes of the world, and I had to play along. I clenched my fists, trying to breathe through the surge of frustration. I had worked so hard to get here, and yet it felt like everything I had built was being undermined. I tried to shake it off, but the weight of the situation was becoming unbearable. I could feel the tension in my chest tighten, a reminder of how little control I had over my own life. Taking a deep breath, I tried to refocus. The journalist would be here soon, and I couldn't afford to let Celeste's influence taint this opportunity. I needed to rise above it, but as I prepared for the interview, I couldn't shake the feeling that my success was being hijacked, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. The interview began, and I forced myself to smile as the journalist asked the first question. It was all going well until my phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't just a message from Celeste. It was an email from her, directly to the journalist. She was trying to manipulate the direction of the article, suggesting that I focus more on my role as a supportive wife rather than a powerful entrepreneur. A wave of disbelief washed over me. Was this really happening? She was trying to take control of my narrative again, dictating how the world would see me. My stomach churned with the weight of it all. I tried to maintain my composure, but it was becoming more difficult by the minute. The journalist continued asking questions, but I could feel my mind spinning. This wasn't just about an article anymore. This was about Celeste trying to rewrite the story of my life, and I was done letting her do it. As the interview dragged on, I made a decision. I wasn't going to play along anymore. Celeste couldn't control me. Not anymore. I would stand my ground, even if it meant standing alone. The interview concluded, and I felt a strange sense of relief. But it was short-lived. I knew what I had to do next. The battle for my career, for my future, was far from over. I couldn't let Celeste continue to manipulate the situation. I had to confront her, once and for all. That evening, we all gathered for dinner, Dorian, Celeste, and me. The air was thick with tension as I tried to remain calm, but I could feel the storm brewing inside me. Celeste had pushed me too far, and I was done being the quiet, accommodating wife. It was time for me to take a stand. Celeste, I began, my voice steady but firm. I'm done. I'm done letting you control my career, my success, and my narrative. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I won't let anyone, especially you, define me. The silence at the table was deafening. Celeste's face twisted into a sneer, but I could see the shock in her eyes. She didn't expect this from me. You think you can just talk to me like that? She sneered, her voice laced with contempt. You're nothing without your family. Remember that? I felt my blood boil, but I refused to let her get to me. No, Celeste, I'm not just your son's wife. I'm Vivienne, and if you can't accept that, then that's your problem, not mine. Dorian, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. Vivienne, please, calm down. His voice was pleading, but it was too late. The dam had broken. I was done playing the part he expected me to play. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, I snapped. This is about me, about my life, my career. If you can't see that, then I have no idea who you are anymore. Dorian's face fell, and for the first time in a long time I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But it didn't matter anymore. He had chosen his side long ago, and it wasn't with me. I turned away from him and focused on Celeste. This is my fight now, and I will not let you or anyone else take it from me. The room was silent again, but this time it was different. I had said what I needed to say. I had stood up for myself. It wasn't the resolution I wanted, but it was the only one I had. The tension between us was palpable, but I knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready for the fight. I would no longer let anyone dictate the terms of my life. The silence in the living room felt suffocating, as if the weight of everything that had transpired was pressing down on me from all sides. I sat across from Dorian, the space between us wide and yet somehow still too close. The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy and thick. We had fought this battle countless times before, but now everything had come to a head. The tension between us was unbearable, like a storm waiting to break. I couldn't focus on the fact that Dorian still hadn't apologized for his actions, because that was the least of my concerns now. His betrayal had been one thing, but the real fracture between us was deeper. It was about trust, respect, and the unbearable weight of our unspoken truths. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the actions themselves or the fact that I felt completely alone in this marriage. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I also felt the pull of nostalgia, the woman I used to be when I believed in our future. But that was the problem, wasn't it? The past me believed in love, in compromise, but the woman I had become was done compromising. Vivienne, Dorian finally spoke, his voice tentative. But I didn't want words, not anymore. I looked at him, his expression torn, eyes full of regret. You don't get it, do you? I shook my head, my voice rising slightly despite my attempt to keep it steady. You've always chosen your family over me, and you've made it clear that I'm the one who has to adjust, to play the role, to keep the peace, but I can't do it anymore. He stared at me, like I had just slapped him in the face. There it was again, the guilt, the look that said everything and nothing at the same time. You knew what I was getting into when we got married. Dorian's voice was soft, almost apologetic, but it stung like a betrayal. I never wanted this. You know how much pressure they put on me, on both of us. I stood up, the anger in my chest turning into something sharper, something colder. No, Dorian, you didn't want this. You wanted a comfortable life, one where you didn't have to choose. You wanted to have it all, me, them, and everything in between. I walked across the room, trying to keep the emotions from overwhelming me. I've never been enough, not for you, and definitely not for your mother. The words hit like a hammer, and I could see it in his eyes. He didn't know how to answer. I don't know what you want me to say, he said quietly, his voice faltering. I've tried so hard to make everyone happy, including you, but you, I cut him off. No, Dorian, it's not about trying, it's about action. And you've done nothing. Every time you've had to choose, you've chosen her. Every time. And I'm tired of being second to your mother. I can't live like this anymore. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was, he was as trapped in this mess as I was. But the difference between us was clear. I had reached the breaking point. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I could see the regret in his eyes, the helplessness, but it wasn't enough anymore. He hadn't chosen me. He never would. I'm done, Dorian. I can't keep doing this. I've sacrificed everything for this family, and what do I get in return? A life where I'm not even allowed to be myself? Where my career is a joke and my needs are secondary? I turned to face him, my voice steady now, as if everything had clicked into place. You want me to compromise with your mother? To pretend that I'm okay with everything she does, everything she says? I've done it. I've tried to make peace, to play the part of the good wife. But I can't pretend anymore. Not for you, not for her. Dorian opened his mouth to speak, but I was already walking away. I couldn't stay in this room, not anymore. The decision had been made. I had tried. God, I had tried so hard, but I couldn't do it anymore. I was done. And as I left the room, the weight lifted, but it was replaced with something much heavier, the realization that I had just set myself on a path that I couldn't turn back from. The decision was made. The path was laid out before me. I had to walk it, alone. I sat in my office, my fingers frozen above my phone screen. The words from Maline's post echoed in my mind, a public call-out to Celeste, exposing her manipulations and control over my life. It felt surreal, almost like it wasn't happening. I reread the message again. This was it, the moment of no return. Maline had posted a bombshell on social media, an accusation that would unravel Celeste's carefully constructed image. It was a betrayal of the highest order, but in the back of my mind, it also felt like justice. Celeste had always been the one in control, pulling strings from the shadows, orchestrating every move in my life and career. Now the world was seeing her for what she truly was. My heart raced, but not just from the victory I felt. It was the emotional cost, the bitterness of using the very same public platform that Celeste had used against me. The thrill of seeing her exposed was tempered by the realization that this would change everything. There was no turning back now. I watched as the post quickly went viral, the message being shared far beyond the circles I knew. For once, people were talking about me, not as Dorian's wife or as someone who only existed to please his family. They were seeing me for the first time. But as the likes and shares accumulated, so did the criticism. Some praised me for my courage, for standing up to the matriarch who had caused so much pain. Others didn't understand. They saw it as airing dirty laundry, as a woman dragging her family into a public scandal. I could feel the weight of it, the tension between feeling empowered and feeling isolated. My actions had irrevocably changed things, and I wasn't sure if it was worth it. Then, in the midst of it all, I decided to act. I couldn't just sit back and let the world see me as a victim anymore. The time had come to take control, to make my own statement. I opened up my social media profile, hesitated for a second, and then hit post. This was my moment, my declaration. I laid out everything, my journey, my struggles, and my independence. I refused to be defined by anyone else's narrative anymore, especially not Celeste's. I stated that I would no longer be anyone's pawn in their games, not even Dorian's. The post was sharp, unapologetic, a powerful statement about who I was and what I stood for. But as soon as I hit send, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Empowerment, yes, but beneath that, a deep sadness. It had taken everything for me to get to this point. The fight for my own identity, my career, my family, it had all led to this, standing alone in the middle of a battlefield. I had fought against the constant manipulation, and now I had to face the consequences. But as much as the sadness lingered, the liberation was undeniable. I was standing tall, owning my truth, and no one, not even Dorian, could take that away from me. I didn't know what the fallout would be, but I was prepared for whatever came next. My heart was pounding as I stood up, looking out the window at the world beyond. My family might never understand me. Dorian might never be the man I hoped he would be. But one thing was clear. I was no longer defined by anyone but myself. And just as I began to feel the weight of the emotional toll, the phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look at it to know it was him, Dorian. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked away. The decision had been made. The road ahead would be mine to carve, and no one could stop me. The living room was quieter than usual. The weight of the silence between Dorian and me was palpable. I sat across from him, exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Everything that had been building up between us for weeks, months, even years had led to this moment. This conversation would determine the fate of our marriage. I could feel the pressure in the air. There was no turning back now. I knew the love I once felt for Dorian, the dream of a perfect family, was still inside me somewhere, but it was buried beneath the layers of hurt and betrayal. How could I trust him again? How could I trust that his words now were not just another attempt to salvage the wreckage of his family's expectations, the same expectations he had always chosen over me? My heart felt heavy, but I had come to a breaking point. I couldn't live in the limbo of uncertainty any longer. It was either this marriage, with all its scars, or my freedom. And right now, I wasn't sure which one I wanted more. Dorian cleared his throat, his voice shaky but filled with sincerity. "Vivienne," he began, "I've been blind to everything. To you, to us. I've made so many mistakes. I'm willing to sacrifice everything, even my position in the family business, to prove to you that I want this marriage." His words hung in the air, as if they had the power to change everything. I stared at him, my mind racing. A sacrifice. He was offering to give up his privileged position, his career, and his ties to his mother's influence, all to rebuild our relationship. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like the exact thing I had wanted for years. But why did it feel like a bandage on a wound that needed stitches? The words stung. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let myself be swept up in this moment, to imagine a future where we were free from the hold of his family. But something deep inside me told me I had heard this before. His promises, his guilt, were they enough? I've heard promises, Dorian, and I don't know if I can believe this one. My voice was softer than I expected, but the skepticism was there, biting at my every word. How do I know this isn't just another way for you to fix things for yourself? How do I know this is about us, and not just about you trying to make everything right? He looked at me, his eyes full of regret and desperation. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep living under my mother's thumb. If I have to walk away from everything to make it right with you, then I will. I'll give it all up. For you. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. A life without the family business, without the luxury of the life he had known. He was willing to throw it all away. I could see the pain in his eyes, the fear that came with such a drastic decision. But was it enough? Was this enough for me to heal? Was I ready to forgive? I sat there, silence stretching between us, a million thoughts running through my mind. A part of me wanted to believe him, to take him at his word and trust that he was finally choosing me. But then the memories of all the years he'd chosen his family, of how long I had waited for him to act, to choose us, haunted me. I don't want you to give up everything for me, I whispered. I want you to choose me, Dorian. But I need to know you're doing this because you want it, not because you think it's what I want, not because it's a sacrifice you think will make everything better. His eyes filled with pain. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said softly. I'm asking for a chance, a real chance. I felt the burden of his sacrifice weighing on me. The choices in front of me felt impossible. He was offering me everything, but it came at the cost of his family, his identity. Could I really ask him to do that? Could I live with the guilt if he gave it all up? The room felt suffocating as the tension swirled. I wanted to say the words, yes, let's rebuild, let's start fresh. But there was too much hurt, too much broken trust to ignore. I had given so much, sacrificed so much for this marriage. But was it worth it anymore? Dorian was waiting for my answer, his gaze fixed on me, his face a picture of uncertainty and longing. My heart raced. I could feel the crossroads ahead of me, and every path seemed to lead to heartbreak. I don't know, Dorian, I whispered, feeling the tears welling up. I don't know if I can believe in us anymore. The weight of his decision, his willingness to give it all up, felt like too much to bear. I loved him. I always would. But was that enough? Could love heal the scars he had left on me? Or had we reached the point where we had broken each other too much to fix? The silence was deafening as I stood up, my body heavy with the emotional toll of this decision. As I walked toward the door, I felt the crushing finality of what was to come. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to find my own path, and that path might not include Dorian. The soft hum of the city outside my office window did nothing to calm the chaos inside my mind. The weight of everything that had brought me to this moment, this pivotal, life-altering moment, was almost unbearable. My office, once a space of triumph and clarity, now felt suffocating. The polished wooden desk in front of me seemed like a reflection of my own fractured life. Family photos that once brought me comfort now felt like relics of a past I couldn't return to, reminders of everything I had sacrificed to keep up appearances. I stared at my phone, the latest post from my business partner, Meline, still glowing on the screen. Celeste had been exposed, her manipulative ways laid bare for the world to see. It was a victory, but not the kind I'd hoped for. My emotions tangled in a knot. How had things gotten so far? I had spent years in silence, in compromise, in self-doubt. But now, the silence felt like a prison I could no longer live in. I had carried the weight of others' expectations for far too long. The decision ahead of me was a monumental one. Stay in this broken marriage and continue to let my identity be overshadowed by family drama, or finally break free and reclaim control of my life and my future. I felt as if I had been standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to decide whether to leap or retreat. Then, like a lightning bolt striking through the fog, it hit me. I could no longer live in the shadow of my marriage to Dorian. I could no longer let my happiness be held hostage by his inability to choose me over his family. I was stronger now, stronger than I had ever been, emotionally and professionally. I had fought hard for everything I had built, and I realized, with sudden clarity, that the only way to move forward was without him. The pain that clung to me from our past still lingered, but it was no longer enough to keep me tethered to a man who had never truly fought for me. I had to let go. The only way to heal was to leave the wreckage behind. This was my moment of empowerment. It felt like an explosion of light and freedom. I was no longer bound by the need for validation from anyone, least of all Dorian. I had spent too many years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, trying to keep the peace with a family that had never really seen me. But now, I was ready to define myself. I was ready to create a future where I was in control. I moved swiftly, confidently, as if a new part of me had been born. I began drafting emails, making phone calls, organizing meetings with investors. My vision for the future was clear. I wasn't just going to be successful. I was going to be a force. I would expand my business, take it global. The company that had once been a small dream of mine would become my empire. I was ready to stand on my own 2 feet, and I would prove to the world and to myself that I didn't need anyone, especially not Dorian, to make that happen. The sense of liberation was overwhelming. I was terrified, yes, but the fear was nothing compared to the exhilaration I felt at the thought of stepping into a future I had once only dreamed about. This was my new life, one where I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. I wasn't defined by a marriage, by a family, or by a past I couldn't change. I was free. As the days passed, I found myself signing contracts, making decisions with confidence, and taking control of my destiny. But in those quiet moments, when I wasn't busy building the future, I allowed myself to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the anger, the betrayals, they had shaped me, but they no longer had the power to dictate my path. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined who I was. I was standing in the conference room now, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the hum of conversations. The room was full of sharp minds, ambitious professionals, and people who respected me for my intellect and drive. It was my moment. I took my seat at the head of the table, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the power of my own decisions. This wasn't just about business. This was about reclaiming my life. I glanced around the room, feeling the weight of everything I had overcome. The struggle, the sacrifices, the tears. It had all led to this moment. No longer would I let anyone undermine me. I had earned my place at this table and no one would take it from me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm. My path was clear, and I was no longer bound by the toxic relationships that had held me back. The future was mine to shape, and I would shape it on my terms. The emotional release was cathartic, and as I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, I knew I was no longer the woman who had been afraid to make her own choices, the woman who had been afraid to stand up for herself. I was something stronger now. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and I was ready for it. The quiet of the house was deafening, a sharp contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I sat in my favorite chair, a glass of water forgotten beside me, staring at the pictures on the walls. The faces of my family, my younger self, my parents, and Dorian, felt like strangers now. I ran my fingers over the cool surface of the glass, my mind racing through the events that had led me here. The decision I had to make felt like a weight that would crush me if I allowed it to. On one side, my heart ached with a love I couldn't fully let go of. On the other, my mind screamed for liberation from the toxic patterns that had held me hostage for so long. The calmness of the room seemed like a mockery, a cruel silence before the inevitable storm. I knew deep down that the crossroads I stood at would decide my future forever. I had spent years compromising, holding on to the hope that Dorian would see the truth. But the truth had revealed itself in harsh, painful flashes over the last few months. And now, as I sat in this empty room, I realized something fundamental. My strength didn't come from holding on. It came from letting go. The door opened softly, and there he was, Dorian. The man I had once believed I would grow old with. The man who had broken me in ways I had never thought possible. His face was etched with remorse, his eyes filled with desperation. He had come to try again, and I knew this moment would be the final test. "I know I've hurt you," Dorian began, his voice breaking. But I'm willing to change. I'm ready to put everything behind me and focus on us. I'll do whatever it takes. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, but there was no magic left in them. They were just words. Words I had heard before, words that meant nothing after everything he'd done. I crossed my arms, keeping my face as neutral as I could, but inside, my heart was heavy. His plea seemed more like a last-ditch effort to save his own skin than a genuine attempt to make things right. "Is that so?" I said, my voice colder than I intended. "And why now, Dorian? Why after everything? After I've begged you to choose me, why now? What makes this time different?" His face faltered. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence hung between us like a weight, suffocating any chance of reconciliation. Then it happened. The moment I had feared, but also expected. The truth finally surfaced. Dorian's eyes dropped to the floor, and with it came the devastating revelation. "I just wanted her approval," he whispered. "I didn't know how to stop seeking my mother's validation. I thought if I impressed her, everything would work out. But I see now, I've lost everything." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. His words were the final blow, the last thread of illusion severed. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My entire marriage had been built on his insecurities, his need for a woman's approval, and his willingness to sacrifice our happiness for it. I had been a footnote in his quest for validation, and in that moment, my resolve crystallized. I would no longer live in the shadows of his shortcomings. "You've made your choice, Dorian," I said, my voice steady, though every fiber of my being trembled. "And so have I." I stood up, feeling the weight of the years lifting off my shoulders. I no longer needed to fix him. I no longer needed to hold on to a relationship that had crumbled long before I realized it. As I walked toward the door, I turned to look at him one last time. His eyes were filled with desperation, but there was no turning back for me. I had made my decision, and the time for second chances had passed. The door closed softly behind me, and I breathed for the first time in months. I had walked away from the wreckage, from the broken promises and the years of pain. And I knew, deep in my heart, that I had done the right thing. The next step was clear. I was going to take control of my life. I wasn't going to wait for permission or validation from anyone anymore. In the days that followed, I didn't waste time looking back. I expanded my business, took meetings with potential investors, and set my sights on a global future. I no longer needed to explain myself or apologize for wanting more. For once, I was doing things for me. It was my time to shine. And then, I made the public declaration. In front of my team, my investors, and a growing community of supporters, I stood tall and shared my decision. My business was no longer just a part of my life. It was my empire. I was the one steering the ship now. But even as the room filled with applause, I couldn't help but wonder, would Dorian ever understand? Would he ever realize the gravity of what he had lost? Would he ever stop running from the truth, the way I had for so long? As I walked away from the podium, a sense of victory settled over me. I had the last laugh, not just over him, but over everything that had ever tried to keep me down. The future was mine now, and nothing would stop me from claiming it. Looking back, I realized that walking away wasn't the hardest part. It was believing I was worth more. I wasted so much time trying to earn love from people who only valued control. But strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's saying no when it's easier to say yes. It's choosing yourself even when your heart is breaking. If you're holding on to something that's been draining you, whether it's a relationship, a job, or a version of yourself that no longer serves you, I want you to know it's okay to let go. You don't have to keep shrinking to fit into someone else's story. Write your own. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between your peace and someone you love? What helped you decide? Drop a comment and share your story, or just let me know where you're watching from. If this story touched you, hit that like button and comment 1 so I know you're out there. If you didn't vibe with it, I'd love to hear why. This is a space for real talk. And hey, if you're into raw, emotional stories that reflect real life, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. This journey, We're just getting started.